What if I told you that an Amish child who refuses to be baptized at 18 technically cannot be shunned, but can still lose their family, their standing, and every relationship they have ever known, one quiet door closing at a time? What baptism actually means. In the Amish church, baptism is not a ritual performed on infants. It is a voluntary, adult decision made fully conscious of what it commits a person to for the rest of their life. When an Amish young person agrees to be baptized, they are not simply joining a church. They are making a sworn promise before God and the entire congregation to uphold the Ordnung, submit to church authority, and remain Amish until death. It is the most serious commitment an Amish person will ever make, and the community treats it exactly that way.
Why 18 is the pressure point. There is no official age requirement for Amish baptism, but 18 sits at the center of an invisible deadline that the community doesn't write down, but everyone understands. By 16, Rumspringa has begun, and a teenager is expected to start seriously considering their future. By 18 or 19, most of their peers are either already baptized or actively preparing for it. Baptism typically happens between the ages of 18 and 22, and waiting past that without a clear reason begins to draw quiet attention from elders, neighbors, and parents alike. A 17-year-old who hasn't decided is still finding their way. An 18-year-old who says no is making a statement, whether they intend to or not.
The refusal. It rarely happens in a single dramatic moment. More often, it happens in the slow, painful accumulation of avoided conversations, deflected questions, and one missed instruction class after another. Amish baptism requires months of preparation, during which the young person attends classes taught by the bishop, learning the articles of faith and the expectations of church membership. Simply not showing up to those classes, week after week, is itself a form of refusal. When the moment finally becomes undeniable, when the bishop or a parent asks directly whether they intend to be baptized, the answer that comes back is rarely a speech. It is often just a silence, or a few quiet words, that land in the room with the weight of everything unsaid behind them. No shunning, but something else here is the legal and theological reality that most outsiders don't know. An Amish person who was never baptized cannot be formally shunned. Shunning, or Meidung, applies only to those who made baptismal vows and then broke them. A young person who simply never takes those vows has never broken any oath to the church, and therefore the formal machinery of excommunication cannot be applied to them. Church scholars and Amish studies researchers confirm this consistently. The community cannot officially cut them off, but unofficial is a different matter entirely. A community of 40 households where every adult has known you since birth does not need a bishop's decree to make a person feel invisible. The invitations stop coming. The conversations at church become shorter. The young men who might have courted a daughter begin looking elsewhere. The atmosphere shifts in ways that are impossible to point to directly, but impossible to ignore. No formal shunning, but a slow, quiet withdrawal that can feel, in daily life, almost identical to it. The parents carry the shame. In an Amish community, a child's refusal to be baptized does not land only on the child. It lands squarely on the parents, and it lands hard. The community's quiet judgment does not ask what went wrong with the young person. It asks what went wrong in that household. A father whose son refuses baptism begins to notice it in small ways. A slightly shorter greeting after Sunday service. A conversation that ends a beat too early. A look exchanged between two neighbors that stops the moment he glances over. Nobody says anything directly, because that is not how Amish communities handle these things. But the message is received. For a mother, it cuts differently. She has raised this child inside the faith with the same daily investment she gave to every other child in the house. She has prayed over them, taught them, sat beside them through every church service since they were old enough to sit still. A refusal feels to many Amish mothers less like a choice their child made, and more like a verdict on everything she poured into that child's life. The grief is private, rarely spoken, and in some families, it never fully heals.
The doors that quietly close. Even without formal shunning, the refusal to be baptized closes doors inside the community in ways that are practical, not just social. Church membership in Amish life is not merely spiritual, it is the foundation of nearly every institution that matters. Community aid, the system by which Amish families support each other through medical crises, barn fires, and financial hardship, operates through the church. A non-member is not automatically excluded from receiving help, but their standing is different, and everyone feels the difference even when nobody says so directly. Land inheritance is another pressure point. In many Amish families, the expectation that a son will eventually take over the farm or a daughter will marry into one is tied directly to church membership. A young man who refuses baptism disrupts the quiet succession plan his father has been building for decades. He may still be welcomed at the dinner table, but the future his parents had quietly mapped out for him begins to dissolve. Business partnerships, community referrals, access to the networks that make Amish economic life function. All of these run through membership in ways that are rarely spoken aloud but universally understood. Every baptized peer around them is moving forward into adult Amish life. The unbaptized young person is standing still while everything moves ahead without them.
No marriage, no future here. Of all the doors that close, this one closes loudest. In the Amish community, marriage requires baptism. There are no exceptions. A young man who is not a church member cannot court a baptized Amish woman, because she cannot marry someone outside the church without leaving it herself. A young woman who is not baptized is similarly unavailable to baptized Amish men who intend to stay. The entire social machinery of Amish courtship, the Sunday singings, the carefully observed patterns of who rides home with whom, the understood progression toward marriage and household formation, is built on the assumption that both parties are moving toward or already within church membership. This means that refusing baptism at 18 is not simply a religious decision. It is a decision about whether to have a family at all within the only world the young person has ever known. The peers they grew up beside will marry each other, build homes beside each other, raise children in the same district. The unbaptized 18-year-old watches all of that begin to happen around them from a position that has no clear path forward. Some resolve this by eventually choosing baptism after years of delay. Others resolve it by leaving. Very few find a way to stay indefinitely in the in-between without it eventually becoming unbearable. The choice, limbo or leaving. At some point, every unbaptized young person who has not yet resolved their situation faces a version of the same two options. They can remain in the community indefinitely, living at home, working, attending church as a non-member, watched quietly by everyone who is waiting to see which way they go. Or they can leave. Neither option is clean. Staying in limbo carries its own particular weight. Some young people spend years in this position, their late teens stretching into their mid-20s, still nominally present in the community, but unable to fully participate in the adult Amish life forming around them. Parents continue to hope. Elders continue to wait. Some communities handle this with genuine patience, giving a young person years to arrive at their decision without additional pressure. Others are less patient, and the social temperature rises the longer the uncertainty continues. Leaving is harder than most outsiders imagine, not emotionally only, but practically. An 18-year-old who has grown up entirely within the Amish community may have no government-issued identification, no social security card they have ever used, no credit history, and an 8th-grade education that the outside world does not recognize as sufficient for most employment. They have never paid a utility bill, never signed a lease, never navigated a benefits application. The outside world does not slow down for someone arriving inside it unprepared, and the Amish community that shaped them has no mechanism for easing that transition.
Leaving with nothing. For those who do leave, the first months outside the community are described by former Amish consistently as among the most disorienting experiences of their lives, even by those who ultimately say leaving was the right decision. The practical obstacles come first. Obtaining a birth certificate and a government ID requires navigating bureaucratic systems no one taught them to use. Opening a bank account, finding housing, securing a job without a verifiable work history all require documents and knowledge that Amish life simply does not produce. Some former Amish describe spending months figuring out tasks that most 18-year-olds who grew up in the outside world completed years earlier. The loneliness arrives alongside the practical problems and often outlasts them. An Amish young person who leaves behind an unbaptized life leaves behind every relationship they have ever had. Parents who remain in the faith may keep contact to varying degrees depending on their community's expectations, but the relationship changes permanently. Siblings who are baptized members may limit interaction, not out of cruelty, but because their own standing in the church can be affected by how openly they associate with someone who has left. Friends from childhood are now, effectively, in a different world. What carries many of them through this period is the practical competence they do have. An Amish 18-year-old who grew up on a working farm can do physical labor, fix things, manage animals, and work from before sunrise without complaint. These skills translate, even when the credentials don't. Many former Amish find their footing through trade work, construction, or agriculture, building a life piece by piece in the same methodical way they were taught to build everything else. The ones who never get baptized. The number is larger than most people expect. In some Amish communities, particularly larger and more established settlements, between 10 and 30% of young people who go through Rumspringa ultimately choose not to be baptized. This is not a fringe occurrence. It is a real and recurring pattern that every Amish community has to quietly absorb, generation after generation. The high retention rates that Amish communities are known for, the 85 to 90% figures cited in most studies, are real, but they are averages across a wide range of communities, and some districts consistently lose more young people than others. What happens to the ones who never get baptized varies considerably. Some leave the Amish entirely and build lives in the outside world, maintaining whatever family contact their community's norms allow. Some join Mennonite or other Anabaptist churches, which is considered less catastrophic by most Amish parents than leaving plain life entirely, since the spiritual foundation remains similar even if the specific community is different. A small number remain in the community indefinitely as non-members, aging into a permanent in-between status that becomes harder to maintain the older they get. What unites most of their stories, regardless of which direction they ultimately went, is the weight of the decision itself. This is not a choice made lightly or quickly. It is usually made slowly, over years, under the steady pressure of a community waiting, parents grieving quietly, and a future that remains on hold for as long as the answer stays uncertain. The ones who eventually leave often say they knew years before they admitted it, and that the delay was not uncertainty about the answer, but grief about what the answer would cost them. Conclusion. What happens when an Amish child refuses to be baptized at 18 is not a single event. It is a slow unraveling, quiet, and largely invisible to anyone outside the community that can stretch across years before it resolves in either direction. There is no formal punishment, no dramatic exile, no bishop standing at a door with a decree. What there is instead is a gradual withdrawal of the future the community had always assumed this person would step into, a future that was never promised in writing but was understood by everyone, including the young person who is now saying no to it. The theological reality that no oath was broken and therefore no shunning applies offers little practical comfort to a family sitting across a dinner table from a son or daughter who has quietly made clear they are not going to be baptized. The pain is the same. The shame the parents carry into Sunday service is the same. The empty chair in the pew where that young person would eventually have sat as a full member feels just as empty whether or not the church has officially declared it so. For the young person themselves, the refusal is rarely an act of rebellion in the way outsiders might imagine. It is more often an act of honesty, made at enormous personal cost. by someone who loves their family and their community and cannot bring themselves to make a lifelong promise they are not certain they can keep. The Amish faith has always insisted that baptism must be chosen freely to be meaningful. The tragedy for everyone involved is that sometimes a child raised entirely inside that faith chooses freely, and the answer that comes back is not the one anyone prayed for.